Hey crew, so we're joined here today by Mr. Ryan Creed, mushroom extraordinaire, mushroom connoisseur, mushroom enthusiast. What do we call you? Stoked to be having this chat today. We've already kind of had a pre-chat, and I reckon this is going to be a fair bit of fun. And we haven't really structured much of a plan to today's chat, so we're just going to see where it rolls, which is quite different to my other interviews. But yeah, let's see how we go. Ryan, do you want to kick off? Hi. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where are you from? How on earth did you discover mushrooms, and what are they for you?
Thanks, Nellie. Thanks for having me. It's been, we've had so many good chats in our local health store, and it's just kind of like been inevitable that we get together to have a formal chat and enable people to listen in. Hey, But mushrooms. Well, 6 years ago, I started growing mushrooms off coffee waste and learning how to produce food for the community, and that really sparked my interest because it wasn't easy food to grow. Because I have zero experience in growing food, and I still struggle to grow some herbs. But mushrooms were something that you can grow a valuable food source in a small space and from cheap materials. So that kickstarted my interest, and the food production was good, but there was more to learn about the health aspect. So medicinal mushrooms and mushrooms that the Chinese and the Japanese cultures have been using for so long, is starting to get a lot of movement in the West now, but still there's a long way to go. And the benefits are profound.
Is that where it seems to originate from, China and Japan, the mushroom culture?
Russia and Europe. Certainly in medicinal senses, it was used in traditional cultures throughout Europe and Asia. Just in America and the US, in America and Australia and New Zealand, our local countries haven't really used them for medicinal purposes. We know the button mushroom pretty well, but not so much the chaga and the reishi and the cordyceps and the shiitake, these kind of mushrooms.
Actually, that's interesting. So I'm already just getting the random questions come through, right? Because one of the things I've always wondered is there an equivalent in the Australian native, like Indigenous world and culture? Like, did we have any form of fungi or mushrooms that we consumed here in Australia? Do you know anything about that one?
That's a good point. I've dug into that research too, and it seems to be limited. There are native mushrooms that were consumed, from what I can find, that's been documented. However, not used on the level that it was used in other cultures for healing and sacred processes.
Yeah, right. Cool. Sweet. Well, one of the conversations, I guess, that started between you and I was, obviously I'm in the world of German medicine, you're in the world of mushrooms, and we just started having these random conversations about how do the two integrate together. And obviously there's a lot of results that are seen with mushrooms and a lot of results that are seen with German medicine. And we started to kind of have this conversation around, like, how is that working? How are they integrating? Like, why do we see such profound results with mushrooms? And what are they doing to the body and or the psyche from a German medicine perspective? So that's kind of what I guess the basis of our chat is going to be around today as well. I thought it'd be really cool to start off with, can you tell us please a little bit about what was your convincer when it came to medicinal mushrooms? What made you go, oh yeah, there's something here? And what are like some of the biggest results, the most profound results you've seen with the use of medicinal mushrooms?
Good question. I'm still becoming more and more convinced. I mean, like I always keep the question over my head about the truth and seek to always question its validity and not always believe what we're told. So although ancient cultures may have used mushrooms for certain purposes, doesn't mean to say that's right or it will help us. So to test it myself is like really what I need to do to discover if it's going to help. So I guess what I've seen most profound is the benefit for animals in most recent times. So dogs and cats, horses, chickens, farmed animals, that appear to be under a lot of stress. It's very obvious that these animals are living a life that's incongruent with their natural state and in their natural diet, their natural social interactions with other animals, confined spaces or these kind of thing. But I've seen reduction in tumor sizes in cats, significant, with the use of mushrooms like turkey tail. And I've seen urinary tract infections clear up in 2 days when dogs have been fed with medicinal mushrooms such as chaga and shiitake and reishi. So this is very clear to me that the mushrooms are doing something profound in the body to bring balance, restore balance.
Yeah.
I've seen chickens lay more eggs and reduce the severity of disease. Spotty liver disease is something that's very prevalent in free-range chickens, and I've been involved with the procedure of feeding them with mushrooms, feeding them with medicinal mushrooms, and decrease mortality and increase in egg laying things. So
Wow.
there's something happening here, and like that leads to like how German New Medicine has a thorough understanding of how psyche, the thoughts through the psyche create disease, and that's the root cause of disease. So how is, on a physical level, the polysaccharides and the terpenes and the compounds in mushrooms that are acting to resolve disease or resolve issues, are they resolving the root cause, or are they working on a physical level? That's what we need to discover, and I'd love to get your input on that, because we've touched on it briefly. You know, the studies not for centuries, studies for decades, showing a link between cancer reduction and tumor reduction, which has been associated with polysaccharide consumption in mushrooms. Yeah, but I'd just love to see how this links in with the understandings of German New Medicine, and see if we can open up a whole can of worms.
Whole can of worms, or a whole can of flies by the looks of it there.
Oh, there's so many flies here, yeah.
Australia, mate.
WA.
Yeah, WA. Yeah. So we have like had a little snippet of this conversation, and in my mind, there's a couple of different ways. One question I just want to ask before I forget is, do you reckon that these animals would have been consuming mushrooms in the wild as well? Obviously, these are domestic animals now, but in their more, I guess, primal, primitive, archaic form, do you reckon that they would have been consuming mushrooms in the wild as part of their health regime?
I had a discussion about that with a vet, and she said that wolves, you know, where dogs originate from, their DNA, the wolves would actually find mushrooms on the forest floor. They would be scavengers, and they would consume fungi. So that was really cool to hear from her extensive knowledge into dogs.
Yeah.
You know, horses. I mean, I know cows would eat mushrooms. Horses, I don't know. There's clear benefit that something happening in their body on a positive sense. So the vets seem to think that mushrooms have been around for so long, they've been a part of our DNA, even through as we've evolved from other species and things.
Yeah, I've heard that one as well. Cool, fascinating. Yeah, so back to the question on German New Medicine, I think and we don't know, straight up, we're not scientists, we don't have a lab, we can't test these things, but what makes sense to me in my body and mind, there's a couple of different ways that things could be working. So yeah, like you said, are they working on the physical cellular level, or are they working with the psyche? Potentially both, I don't know. So when you say that there's a reduction in stress, that already sparks my mind to go, in German New Medicine, we've got the 2 phases, right? So we've got conflict active phase and healing phase. So conflict active phase is aligned with stress. It's cortisol, it's adrenaline, it's the sympathetic nervous system, it's the flight and fight response. And then healing phase is aligned with the parasympathetic nervous system. So we've got rest and digest, we've got you know, the inflammation comes in, and it's that real like slow time and resting time. So when we say that something is helping like an animal move out of stress, then potentially we're creating an environment that's allowing them to move out of conflict activity as well, and help like dampen that stress response, which could be putting them into the healing phase a bit quicker and helping them align more with their parasympathetic nervous system. So that's one possibility. Yeah, I would say that they're probably, there's probably some potential for the fact that while they might not be resolving the entire biological conflict, perhaps they're creating an environment in the body where physically that process is able to happen a bit quicker or a bit faster when we're talking about tissue regeneration or tissue degradation that happens in healing phase. These things do need the right conditions. So perhaps there's some benefit and value from the mushrooms happening there as well. Then we come to probably what I find is the more interesting part, and that's the psyche. So are these, are these living things, mushrooms, are they somehow interacting with the psyche? And something that sort of came to mind when we originally tiptoed into this subject was that a mushroom is a living thing, we're a living thing, animals are living things, and we are all effectively nature. We're all a part of living nature. And there's intelligence in all living things, right? So are these mushrooms somehow communicating with the psyche of an animal or a human to help them resolve the conflict that's linked to a specific biological program? And what I wonder here is if we're seeing such dramatic results in animals, potentially is because they don't overthink things, or as far as we know, they don't overthink things, yeah? So they're a far more like primal orientated being, I guess. Like they really go for pure survival things. So it's like, have I got enough food? Do I have my boundaries? Can I reproduce? Very, very primal instinct things, where as we humans have moved somewhat more like into a more complex way of life, in that we have all this emotional response as well. So the German New Medicine biological programs are based on a very, very biological primitive blueprint, right? So this is in our bodies, it's in our system from when we were cave people, whatever we were, who needed to hunt and gather and find food and got chased by tigers and had to defend our territory and boundaries. The programs are designed to help us survive. And I suspect that that is still very true for animals, whereas now humans are, like I said, much more in that emotional realm. So where something may have once been a program that helped us escape from a tiger that was chasing us, now instead of that tiger, we flick through Facebook or Instagram or some other media means, and we get all these shock responses from something that's not actually a tiger chasing us, but it's the equivalent of in our emotional brain. So we're a lot more complex, and we're responding to a lot more complex and subtle issues, whereas the animals are still very much responding to quite primal issues. So I'm wondering if that's why we're seeing such dramatic results with animals, is they might be a bit simpler to help than a human sometimes, if that makes sense. And then and then these mushrooms are potentially communicating with the psyche to help the animal resolve that primal biological program and step out of conflict activity. So they're my theories around that question. How does that sit with you, and where does that kind of work in with what you know of mushrooms and your gut feeling?
I'd be interested to know if Dr. Harmer spoke about substances that work on the physical body as well as the psyche, or did he speak of, not necessarily mushrooms, but other supplements or compounds from nature that sped up the healing process, or did it communicate to the psyche?
Not necessarily, as far as I'm aware, not necessarily communicate with the psyche. And there's little bits and pieces, and it's not so much that he discovered that compounds or substances would necessarily resolve a biological program. Like his take on that was very much one of two things has to happen. Either a practical resolution has to come about, that is, the situation literally changes. So in the case of a tiger that was chasing you, the tiger stops chasing you or you get away from it. Or a perceptional change, which is like going from the tiger, like, holy crap, I'm getting chased by a tiger that's going to attack me, to, look, I'm getting some exercise. And so the chasing tiger no longer becomes a problem in the psyche, it becomes an okayness. So they're the two things that Dr. Harmer really stuck to that had to happen, a practical change or a perceptional change, in order for a biological program to complete and move through the phases. So they're not going to heal us on a physical level, but they may, as I sort of referred to before, there are some substances that were sort of spoken about that might help create an environment that either reduce the severity of the conflict active phase in terms of bringing a person out of stress a little bit, or speed up the healing phase by creating a favorable environment for the cellular repair or cellular degradation that happens in healing phase to occur, and helping that process along. Like, for example, a healing process in someone who's incredibly unhealthy, has a really lacking nutritionally diet and is very stressed. The healing phase in someone, a candidate like that, is probably going to take a lot longer than in someone who has a really good high nutrition diet and getting the things in, because the microbes necessary to complete the healing phase aren't supported well, basically, is what's happening there.
Right, because the microbes need good nutrition.
The microbes need good nutrition, and our bodies in general to facilitate those, the adaptations back the other way from conflict active phase, need a favorable environment to do that. So yeah, not necessarily that a substance would resolve a program in full, but they could create favorable or unfavorable environments for that to happen in. And I don't believe that he spoke to anything where a substance could communicate with the psyche, and therefore, you know, a dialogue of intelligence or something that would help the psyche resolve. He definitely spoke of inhibitors. So, you know, like alcohol is potentially going to prolong somebody moving out of conflict active phase, because it's going to dull a lot of things and mask a lot of things and stuff like that. The only one I can really think of that I know he speaks quite a bit about is actually ocean water, and going to the ocean and returning to the ocean. So there's some indication that there's a bit of a core belief that we as beings originated from the ocean. And so one of the recommended therapies, particularly when it comes to kidney collecting tubule conflicts, which is the basis of that is like a fish out of water. So the nuances of that conflict are isolation, abandonment, refugee, and existential. And so part of the therapy recommended for that one is actually to return to the ocean and be in the ocean and the water as much as we can, because that's where our bodies feel the most home. So that's really the only one that I can think of as an external substance. And even then, it's not necessarily going to resolve the program, but it might, again, help the body and the mind to create favorable environments to do that in.
That's phenomenal. I mean, from the history of my health, I've had what mainstream would call eczema, and it's been a very clear link with when I'm in the salt water and the skin improves.
Yeah.
So there may be an association with the stress relief and the feeling of calmness and safety in the water.
Yeah, and also considering that eczema is a separation conflict. So yeah, and well, the redness in eczema as well happens in healing phase too, right? So there is a cycle and some trigger going on there for you for sure. But what does the ocean mean to you? What is, like, what's good about it? What associations do you have with it is definitely a question for you.
Yeah, fun and relaxation, or a holiday, or whatever it may be, leisure time. Yeah. That's really interesting. And I guess there's so much more to discover when it comes to the core basics or the core of German new medicine, but understanding how we can accelerate healing phases or these kind of things with nutrition or mushrooms or mindset and you know, healing techniques is just a whole world to discover.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. One
thing I have wondered is, I was looking at buying a home recently, and there was power lines nearby, and I'm aware of an association with cancer and power lines, and the closer you are living to power lines, is the increased risk of cancer. So how does that work on a German new medicine perspective?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one too. And again, like, probably not enough data known at this point in time to provide a solid evidence answer. However, the general consensus within the German new medicine world and community, particularly when it comes to 5G and Wi-Fi, is this. So when we experience a shock or a trauma and a biological, the psyche perceives, first of all, so number one, the psyche perceives that shock or trauma in a certain way, which then determines where in the brain is going to be activated with the biological program. So then the biological program is initiated in the brain, and there is actually an impact site in the brain, and then that part of the brain correlates to where the symptoms show up in the body. So Dr. Harmon maps the entire brain as well. Now, what the consensus is with electrics and Wi-Fi and 5G and that sort of thing is that potentially what's happening is that these, I guess, like the best way of explaining it is it's like mimicking a biological conflict. So it's leaving the psyche out of the game, and the confusion with the electrics and whatever's happening there is impacting the brain in the same way that the psyche perceiving a trauma or event would, but without the event. So it's mucking with our wiring, basically. It's mucking with our brain waves is the word I'm looking for, and altering, or not so much altering states, but impacting the brain in a way that a trauma might. And so then the impact is happening on the brain, which then initiates the biological program in the body part associated with the part of the brain, but it's not from a perceived event. It's potentially from, our brains being mucked with, and those waves, it's like crossed wires. That's the best way, the simplest way that we can explain it. That's the consensus in the community at the moment. So
because
for
people
me,
that are getting sorry to interrupt.
Go.
People that are getting the cancer, for example, that are living close to power lines may not even know there's an association with that, but subconsciously there's something happening to their body that is triggering this conflict. Is that right?
So hang on, say that again.
So people that, for example, end up getting cancer, tumors in the body, and weren't even aware an association between a power line, so they weren't consciously thinking of that threat or that conflict, but they got the cancer because subconsciously their body is going through a conflict.
Sort of. So there's missing data on that for me in terms of, I'll explain what I mean by that. So the GNM theory is that those power lines or that Wi-Fi could be impacting the brain in the same way that a trauma would, but without the trauma happening. So it's mucking with our brain waves, which sets off which impacts the brain, which sets off the program in the body. But the missing data there for me is what else is happening for this community. Like, we don't know what events this community has been through. There could be a common theme to what this community of people have experienced. And therefore, if they're perceiving an experience in the same way, that can therefore be setting off the biological program in the body. Yeah. So we would need to know things like, are the cancers all showing up in different random places? Are they showing up in the same place? What times are they showing up? What else has this collective community experienced that could have set off something for all of them or a high percentage of them? So is it the power lines? Is it the Wi-Fi? And this would come down to like every circumstance being assessed individually, really. Yeah. And maybe it is that some groups are being impacted by these electromagnetic waves. Maybe some are not. Maybe some have experienced a traumatic event together. Maybe something happened to the town or the community, or, all sorts of things. So yeah, we couldn't give like a blanket answer for that one. But yeah, it gives you some idea of how the concept works.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. And it just shakes up what we've been taught and the knowledge that we think we have.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
So that's why when I learned about German new medicine, you lent me 2 books and I just read them both, like stuck into it. Like, this is so fascinating. It just changes our whole reality and made me be so much more conscious of my thoughts and, my perceptions, and knowing that I have full control over my health. And I shouldn't be blaming external factors.
100%. Yeah, totally. And that's really what it's all about. And for years, I've known that the concept of radical self-responsibility was really important to me. And then when I came into the GNM world, I was like, oh, this is it, right? It's the whole thing. It's the whole basis of it. It's such an empowering piece of knowledge to have that, there's not much externally that's really going to damage us. It really is all internal. And that's empowering. It's also a bit scary. It's also like, you know, whew, that's a lot of responsibility, right? Oh shit, that means I have to do work.
And that's very empowering.
It is very empowering. Yeah. But yeah, and even back on the Wi-Fi thing. So, you know, even though that's the consensus in GNM, what I would say is that the fear of Wi-Fi and electromagnetics and power lines is probably going to do you more ill than the maybe of if they are messing with us. So for me, it's like being aware about these kind of things and taking small, comfortable, like proactive steps. So for example, like we would turn the Wi-Fi off in the house every night because it doesn't, you know, it's not a big thing. It's a really small thing to remember each night. And if there is impact there, then we're potentially reducing that impact, but not buying into the fear of it. So, you know, if you're going to have shocks all the time from the concept of Wi-Fi being around and 5G being around, it's probably going to be worse off for you than, yeah, just taking these little steps to change things is what I would say on that one.
That's very good.
Yeah.
I was thinking more about the microbial or conscious impact that mushrooms can have on our health. And it makes me think, I'm reading a book called The Fungal Pharmacy at the moment. And what the author describes is that in nature, fungi needs to detoxify the food they eat. So for example, they're eating decomposing wood and, you know, rotting trees and parts from nature. They need to detoxify that through the process of consuming it for their own food. So because they can do that, our bodies are eating the fruiting body of a mushroom, which is then enabling us to detoxify our body or fast track healing and balance the body, bring it back to rhythm, perform amazing performance enhancing feats, because it seems to be what that fungi is needing to do for its own survival in nature.
Yeah, wow. So can you explain that a little bit more? So the fungi, you're saying the fungi, yes, the fungi is eating the decomposing wood and detoxifying itself in that process?
So it's detoxifying its food. It's like cleaning. The author doesn't go into enough detail for me to kind of know the ins and outs of it, but what he described is that, for example, mushrooms are known to clean up oil spills and eat all kinds of food in nature, and they have an incredible ability to turn to create nutrients from and sustenance for growth and survival just from random things in nature. So its processes, it's extremely well evolved processes for millennia has enabled us to benefit from that when we consume a mushroom.
So something I just jotted down a note there when you were talking, because something that strikes me about that is I've never actually thought of a mushroom in the way of like it eats something before.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, but you're right. They, like, when we see them in the forest, they're growing on decomposing trees and stuff. And so I'm imagining they're part of that decomposition process.
Yeah.
What's just sparked in my brain is that with pretty much like almost all biological programs from a GNM perspective, and I'm going to try and stay on a certain path here because I could go down the path of the importance of the embryological layers, right? And the germ layers involvement in this as well. If you want to check that out, have a look deeper into GNM. But all the programs, when they enter into two phases, conflict active phase, healing phase, like I said before, conflict active is when the problem is live, the problem is still a problem. And then the healing phase is when the body, when the psyche has resolved the problem and the body goes into healing phase. Now, in conflict active phase, there is either cell growth or cell degradation or functional loss in order to assist the individual in surviving. Once the body tips over into healing phase, the exact opposite of what happens to the cells happens in healing phase. So if there is cell growth in conflict active phase, there's cellular degradation in healing phase. And if there is cellular degradation in conflict active phase, there's cellular repair in healing phase, or the return of function. Now, all of those processes involve microbes and different kinds of microbes and bacteria. So we've got TB, we've got fungi, we've got bacteria, and we've got what are currently known as viruses. Whether that's the correct terminology for them or not is a big question mark and a conversation for another day, because that hasn't been proven yet. Just side note. But anyway, all of these
major side note.
But all of these processes involve microbes, right? Is it possible that a mushroom is not actually just one living article, but actually a collection of millions and millions of microbes working together in a community? And this is almost along the lines of a jellyfish, right? So a jellyfish, as far as I'm aware, is not one living organism. It's actually a whole heap of different living organisms, as far as I'm aware. I hope I've got that right. So I'm like, ooh, is a mushroom a similar thing? Is a mushroom maybe not one living organism, but actually a huge community of microbes and living organisms that are forming what we see as one thing? Which then, if we're consuming that and using that, taking that into our bodies, could potentially be a really big part of what's happening in the healing phase. And if we've got these like super microbes in our body from the mushroom doing their thing, decomposition or rebuilding, that could also be another pathway of how we're seeing really big results here. Just a thought.
That's quite possible. I mean, the mycelium underneath, if you go to the forest floor and scratch away all the leaves and debris, you'll see a lot of white mycelium, which is very unknown to like the main kind of, we didn't grow up knowing that. And it's like fungi everywhere. And the mycelium can spread for a long distance, but then the fruiting body, as we know as mushrooms, is the bits that pop up that we can eat or not eat, or they're known as toadstools or mushrooms or fungi, whatever we know them as. But they can be a part of one big organism underneath the surface of the leaves, which what you're describing could be a congregation of many different microbes. But it has a physical, hard body, and yeah, I don't know enough about microbiology or anything like that to comment on that. But it's a really good question.
Yeah. And are they one hard body with a massive community of microbes living on them, or are they a community of microbes that's forming a hard body? Because yeah, the jellyfish, I have to look up the jellyfish thing, but I'm pretty sure a jellyfish is not one organism. It's a community of organisms working together.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as I'm aware, mushrooms are also really effective communicators too. Yeah. This is something I feel like I've got somewhere along the line. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah,
like mushrooms communicate with trees to feed them the right, it's a relationship between trees, giving them nutrients, because at the level of under the soil where the roots are, the trees need to access certain nutrients through decomposition, which the mushrooms are facilitating for that tree. So there's a relationship going on there, and then communicating between trees, being like an underground internet between trees. So then they can help each other out. One tree might need more nutrients than another, or because one tree is getting more sunlight. So nature's like the forest is working in harmony, and mushrooms are the balancing act in that process. So so cool, symbiotic relationship. Yeah. And there's just so much more I'm sure we don't know. It's the intelligence of mushrooms is, from what we understand, very profound, but under researched. So yeah, totally. And I just think, like, if they communicate so effectively with each other and with trees, what's to say they're not communicating that effectively with us? And so the potential is there for me that they're somehow unconsciously talking to our psyche, helping the psyche resolve this thing internally, or on some level. That's seems like a really plausible possibility to me.
or whether they're even overriding
It's
the
such an
psyche and
important
communicating
thing
with
to
the body
keep in,
cells.
yeah. It's just a whole new perspective when you can kind of live your life knowing that there are ways of communicating without consciously knowing or consciously thinking, like our body is communicating in many ways, and it's beautiful.
Well, what keeps your heart beating all day, every day? We don't tell it to do every beat, do we?
Yeah, that's right. Good example. Yeah,
super cool.
It makes me think that that the mainstream will draw a link between drinking Coca-Cola or fast food with cancer. Like, do you think that's just weakening the microbial activity for healing phases and things, or like how's the psyche creating cancer by eating fast food?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things going on there again. So one we come back to, is it creating a favorable or an unfavorable environment for when somebody does experience a conflict? How well is that healing phase going to go? And if the body's in a pretty rubbish state, it's probably going to be pretty rough and pretty long and drawn out. There is a caveat in German new medicine that allows for poisoning. So that is something that's not initiated by the psyche, but is a real thing in the body, poisoning and accidents. So is there some level of poisoning going on from these things that we're consuming? I think potentially so. And then the other thing that comes to mind is like the generalization, but the mentality of people who tend to lead those lifestyles. So if we think about a generalization of the person who tends to consume a lot of Coca-Cola or other unnamed fast foods and, you know, that kind of lifestyle and that kind of consumption, do you think that as a generalization, that those types of people are usually going to be of quite a strong mind and constitution and very happy, healthy, mentally stable people? Or do you think that as a generalization, that demographic of population is perhaps going to be people that are not so happy with life, are not so happy with themselves, don't have a lot of love and self-care? Because, and I keep saying generalization, right? Because I know that there are, I know that there's what's the word? There are exceptions to this, to this rule. But in general, the people that I have known in my lifetime that consume a lot of that food and live that kind of lifestyle are not very happy people internally. And so are they going to be more susceptible to conflict? Is there going to be more room for conflicts in their lives because of the way they're living and the other people that they're surrounding themselves with? What's their mentality like? Do they get more easily upset? Are they more easily conflicted? You know, those sorts of things too. On the flip side to that, and like I said, with an exception to the rule, is that, and this is one of the things that leads me to understand GNM as such a truth, is that we also know plenty of people who live absolutely rubbish lifestyles and keep horrendous diets and smoke and drink and do all the things and live to 165 as an exaggeration, but live a very long, healthy life and don't get anything. And we know yoga teachers who live a beautiful, amazing, low tox, vegan lifestyle that get cancer, right? Yeah. And so this is where it comes back to the individual mind and psyche. And it's not necessarily so based on the lifestyle we're living and the foods we're eating. It's far more about how our mind responds to things and our mental state, really, and our psyche, our perception, our filters. Because those people that, and if you think about the personality of those people who like drink and smoke and eat bacon every day for breakfast and live a bad lifestyle, most of the people that I know who are in that bracket are people who are like, nah, like, I don't really care, whatever, carefree, like life's good, I'm just going to party all life long, blah, blah, blah. They're pretty like not bothered by a lot. And then often those real clean diet, low tox yoga teachers and yoga, gurus who get cancer are quite sensitive. And they're like, oh, I mustn't eat that and I mustn't do that and I must live a cleanly life, and quite sensitive people, right? Which then this is what we're talking about. So it's the psyche, it's the mind. There's a couple of different threads there for you.
That's so good. It's it just brings all aspects of life into perspective and the importance of our mindset.
Totally, 100%. Yeah, all comes back to that.
Yeah,
definitely.
What about when doctors prescribe, blood thinners, and for example, a patient might have a stroke, and then they put on blood thinners for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do to, or what's your opinion on like supporting them to see that they might be just prolonging a stage of stress? Sorry, I'm not wording my question well, but there's mentalities that they must be on medication for the rest of their life, otherwise they'll have another stroke, for example. How can we facilitate knowledge so these kind of people are able to see the light and regain full vitality and know and have confidence that they won't be having a stroke if they stop their blood thinners?
In all honesty, I don't think we can. I'm very, very firm in the belief that we can only seed information. We can only do things like this and have conversations around them and put them out there. And then if these people are meant to find this pathway, they will find it. Something in them will be like, I need a different way. I need something else. I'm going looking. But from my experience, when we have, I guess, like offered this kind of information in a too proactive or too aggressive manner, it's not heard. It doesn't land, because there has to be something pretty big for someone to find this. And I find it's just so much more valuable when they find it themselves and they come to it, as opposed to like here. A lot of people that, when you go here, people are like, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. It needs to be a motivation.
Yeah. So my thing is just seeding and just, I guess, having this information as accessible as possible, which is why conversations like this and the work that I'm doing are important, because it's out there. And the more we get it out there as an option, the more accessible and likely it is that people who need it will find it. Yeah. So really that's, just lots of conversations.
Yeah, that's right. And have you had many clients recently? I know you had a young child recently, so kind of been maybe not practicing, but is there a demand for German new medicine?
Absolutely. And I've seen like the most heightened demand I've ever seen for GNM in the last 2 years. There is a huge shift taking place right now. We held the GNM summit we had one in 2020 and one in 21, and the numbers are just like ever growing. Even in our like global community that we've got, people are really starting to look for a different way, like we were just talking about, and because we're making the information more and more accessible, people are coming to it. I just started back at work literally in the last few weeks, and my books are already filling up really fast, which is super exciting. I've kind of just had everything on hold. I've been saying sorry to people for so long, and now, I'm open again, which is really amazing. There's definitely a need and a demand for it, for sure. People are really looking for something different. They're starting to explore. They're starting to go, something's not right here. Maybe the people we thought had our best interests at heart, maybe they don't. Which is super cool. It's so cool. Because when I started out in GNM like nearly 7 years ago now, I was so isolated in it, particularly in Australia. Like, it took me a long time to find anyone else in Australia that was using GNM or knew about GNM or anything. My beautiful, very, very dear friend, Will Hughes, actually passed away probably about 6 months ago now. And he was just like such a light and a rock for me, because he was really one of the first people that I came across in Australia who was in the GNM world. And I learned so much from him. So very much missing him at the moment. But I have trained a few practitioners now. We can't call them practitioners of GNM, but holistic practitioners who are integrating GNM into their work. I've trained a few now as well. So I feel like slowly but surely that community is growing and those seeds are getting planted and moving out, just like the mushrooms, putting the communications out through the grass.
It seems like since COVID, many more people have been willing to question things and you know, discover new realities. So
Yeah,
that's
totally.
true. I'm sure many paths lead to GNM in that sense.
Yeah, 100%. And have you noticed something similar in the mushroom world as well? Like, have you noticed an increase in demand for alternative therapies and medicinal mushrooms over the last few years?
Noticed, you know, immunity is something that is like a buzzword, and mushrooms are very linked with immunity. And it leads me to think that, you know, what's German New Medicine's perspective on immunity? Because there's you know, concepts out there that say, well, there's no such thing as an immune system. It's just it's, you know, what is an immune system? What does it look like? So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's actually the GNM perspective as well. So the phrase immune system is not in the GNM vocab. We would call it a support system. So because there's nothing to be immune from. So yeah, we see that disease and illness, and I always frame it dis-ease as opposed to disease, because I don't really believe that disease exists. Disease does for sure, and illness, but they are the result of a biological program moving through conflict and healing phases and microbial activity. So we don't want to become immune from microbes because they're our friends. They're there to do a job. They're not the enemy. They're not the foe. We need to learn how to communicate with those microbes effectively and support them in their job and sort out our shit in the psyche, as opposed to fighting off an invisible enemy that's actually not an enemy. And one of the metaphors that's used quite frequently in the GNM world is like, firemen are always, or fire people, being politically correct, are always at fires, right? And road workers are always at roadworks, right? But did the fire people cause the fires, and did the road workers cause the holes in the road? No, that would be an assumption. They're actually there to do a job. The same is true in the GNM world of microbes. Because we've always found microbes at the site of a problem, whether that's cellular expansion or cellular degradation, we've found microbes at those sites. And so we have assumed that the microbes are responsible for the problem. However, the GNM perspective is that the microbes are there to do a job. And this is where we go into like germ theory, never been proven, Koch postulates, and all of that rabbit hole that we won't go down today.
Yeah.
But so immune system, no, because there's nothing really to be immune from. We don't need to be immune from anything. We've got a support system, and we need to support our support system. Nature
doesn't make any mistakes, eh?
Nature doesn't make mistakes. That was one of Dr. Harmer's big things. Nothing in nature is diseased, malignant, or brain fog. Got the last one. Disease, malignant, or malfunctioning. Something I should know it off by heart. But yeah, nothing, you know, nature doesn't make mistakes. That was one of his direct quotes. And we
does that mean in all cases tumors won't kill us?
Interesting point. No, I'm not going to say that in all cases tumors won't kill us. So there is a point where a tumor or a growth can become an obstruction in the body. So it can get in the way of an actual process if it obstructs a channel, a vessel, the function of an organ. Usually we only see that when a conflict goes on for too long and is too intense, or the healing phase goes on for too long or isn't too intense, or keeps looping. So if we keep going through conflict active phase and healing phase and back around again, then we're going to see the continued growth or degradation of something, and that can become problematic as well.
So is that like we said, nature never makes a mistake? So is that a case of your body can physically no longer survive because your conflict is too high? Like it's not. Yeah, I mean, is the body making a mistake by killing itself?
Well, then the body thinks it's helping you. The body thinks it's helping you survive. Yeah. And as far as it hasn't been directed by the psyche yet, so it's not nature making a mistake. It's the human emotional brain making a mistake in not resolving the conflict, is what I would say there. Yeah, because the body thinks
and the psyche signals to the cells to create a tumor. Is that right?
Yeah, so the psyche perceives the event or the trauma, the experience, And then how that person's psyche perceives the event determines where in the brain is going to be impacted. So it will ignite the part of the brain that needs to be involved in then initiating the program in the body. And it will be relative to how that individual perceives the event. So it's really good. Oh, so like lung cancer is a death right conflict, right? And the purpose of lung cancer, the expansion of cells in the lung, is so that the lung can better process and absorb oxygen, because the person has experienced a death fright. So the body is like, I think, well, the psyche goes, something's happened, I'm at risk of dying and my oxygen being restricted. So I'm going to impact the brain in the part that I know is going to activate the body organ to do the thing that is needed to help me survive this. And if we've got a death fright, right, where the psyche perceives that there's going to be a lack of oxygen and a threat to life, the thing that the body can do to help an individual survive that is to replicate lung cells so that the physical body can better intake and absorb oxygen and therefore has a higher chance of living. Yeah?
Yeah, right.
So it's always aiming to help us. It's always aiming to help us survive. But if we don't resolve the conflict, if we let that go unnoticed and unresolved, then the body's just going to keep proliferating and keep proliferating and keep proliferating, because it's like, I've got to help you, I've got to help you, I've got to help you. And in actual fact, a lot of these things these days are in our minds and perceived emotional.
So is death conflict a common in smoking then?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And if you think about as well, like, so again, we come back to like the type of personality, like why they're smoking, what they're doing, but also when somebody is smoking, they're literally limiting their oxygen intake, right? Like,
yeah, right.
When they're inhaling smoke, they are not getting oxygen in that air, or not the normal amount of oxygen. So the lungs like, oh, I need more oxygen to keep the body surviving. I'm going to proliferate cells. And the other thing that can happen is that somebody can have a conflict around smoking. So they're like, shit, I'm a smoker, I'm probably going to die of lung cancer. Yeah. So then the body's like, no, you're not going to die. I'm going to proliferate cells so you can get more oxygen in.
Yeah.
Oh, look, lung cancer.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So many tangents.
Yeah.
Are there any?
So the microbes being signaled, like the psyche? How does the psyche interact with the microbes? Is that a thing?
The psyche doesn't necessarily interact with the microbes. The microbes are already a part of what we call the biological program. So psyche does the perceiving. The psyche is like, oh, I'm going to die, or oh, I'm going to starve, or oh, I need to run faster, or oh, my muscles need to be stronger. Whatever that need is, the brain then activates, like the psyche drops on the brain and the brain activates the program in the body. And then the microbes, like, so we have a huge microbial community within us already. And then they're there kind of ready and waiting to do the jobs as they're needed. So it's not so much the psyche that like tells the microbes what to do. It's the biological program kind of comes as a set, I guess, would be the easiest way to say that. So it's very structured, like for each germ layer, in terms of what happens on the cellular level, whether it replicates or degrades in conflict active phase and healing phase, and then what microbes are involved in doing those jobs. So whether it's the replication or the breakdown. So it's like they kind of know, what they're doing on the cellular level.
Cellular. The conflict is resolved, and therefore there must be something like the psyche says conflict resolved, the program can undertake its healing.
Correct. Yeah.
And then the cells call upon certain microbes, or there's certain conditions created in the cells which attract certain microbes.
Yep, correct. And the microbial community will replicate during the conflict active phase in proportion to the intensity and length of the conflict active phase as well. So if there's lots of cellular degradation that happens in conflict active phase, the microbial community will proportionally grow, so that when the body flicks over into healing phase, that microbial community is ready to go to work.
Mm.
Yeah. And so if we have a really long-standing and really intense conflict, the microbial activity is going to be pretty hectic. And that's when we get diagnosed with like these different infections or viruses and stuff like that. So yeah, but if you just have a little conflict that's not very intense, it's short-lived, flick over into healing phase pretty quickly, there might only be like a little microbial community that comes to work.
Yeah, right.
Because they don't have a big thing to sort out.
Interesting. My whole life I was taking steroid creams for my eczema as well, and then which led to then also taking cyclosporin, which is an internal immunosuppressant. And then it got to the stage where these drugs weren't working, and I had brain fog from the medication and things. So at a crisis point, I conducted a lot of research into alternative options, and it led me to the only choice, going cold turkey off all of these medications, which were supporting me, to a massive healing crisis that then led to a healing process of many months for the skin to learn how to produce its own cortisol again. And I think about that healing phase and the support that a doctor from Japan, he created a system called no moisture treatment. And it actually meant that you dehydrate your body deliberately, and therefore your skin would create more cortisol. So it would teach your body to create more cortisol faster.
Wow.
So I guess it was like a tool for speeding up the healing phase. Because people with eczema have always been told to moisturize, shower, moisturize all the time, which was actually prolonging the healing phase, because it was allowing the skin to naturally create robust moisture and strength. So I find that fascinating. I find that so important in combination with German new medicine, that we know these tools to like fast track the healing phase, so we can like recover from illness really fast.
Yeah, massively. It's just like the body's so much smarter than we give it credit for, and sometimes all we need to do is get out of its way. At least sometimes it does need supporting, but sometimes we just need to get the hell out of the way and let it do its thing. Did you find any relief with mushrooms in that process, or in your eczema journey?
I couldn't. It was such a severe, like I was in a very bad way, and so there's such a large level of ill health. I couldn't tell a difference on that level on the use of mushrooms, comparing it. What worked? So what worked was no showering. The longest I went without a shower was like 6 weeks, like literally. But what I found interestingly, and this is another example of microbial work and letting the body do its thing, I didn't smell. Like, you think, oh, you haven't showered so long, you'd stink. But the microbes, whatever they're doing, is in balance, in working on the skin and harmony to create cleanliness and hygiene on a level. So that was really cool to kind of discover that the body does know what to do by itself. Just like you said, get out of its way. So limiting, like even like liquids in food, like limiting the amount of that, and showering, and just letting the cortisol in the skin and the skin barrier repair.
Crazy.
A lot of protein, what's it called, like bone broths, which has collagen in it, so like a lot of skin producing foods.
And we do recommend, like in a lot of healing phases, we recommend a lot of protein and collagen as well, because those microbes need sustenance. They're doing a big job, and so we need to fuel them and feed them. So there are some like dietary recommendations and that kind of thing of how to support the body through those phases as well. So I was going to ask you, was what mushroom or what results have you seen in humans that have blown you away in terms of mushroom use?
I've seen anxiety go from the use of lion's mane. So lion's mane works on a neural level to regenerate nerve cells and strengthen the myelin sheath in the brain. It gives better focus, better memory, better REM sleep, so there's more regeneration and ability to recall and more cognition, and a link with a better well-being. And there's many studies to show that, but I've seen people, well, their testimony or what they come back and say to me is like, this has actually made me feel $1 million. And the verdict's still out on what's happening there with the psyche and the cells and stuff, but it works. As well as someone close to me recently had cancer, and he was using high dose turkey tail throughout his mainstream treatment, and had news this week that he's 90% clear. And we did a lot of holographic kinetics work with him as well, which is working with the psyche. So in combination of those three things, he's in a good shape. But the turkey tail use is in alignment with tumor reduction.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that we spoke about too, Nellie. Like, is reduction of tumors getting in the way of the natural biological process? Like, I mean, the body produces these things for a reason. So why would you want to fast track the removal of them?
Yeah. And I think this is why we see cancers come back a lot of the time as well. Because yes, we are maybe facilitating the removal of the actual tumor, but we're not facilitating the removal of the actual biological conflict, the biological program and the conflict. So if the conflict's still there or the conflict's re-triggered, then the body's going to go through the same processes and grow or degrade the same things, right? Yeah, is it to our best interest? Don't know. I would be, in some instances, there are cases where we just need to bring some relief for the body. Things can grow so big that they obstruct things, and then that can be, an emergency situation where things do need to be cut out or burned or whatever. But I definitely think that, even if you're going to go down the route of conventional medicine, that the psyche needs to be looked at as well, because otherwise we're potentially you're going to see the same thing come back again. And this is where we do. German new medicine doesn't believe in the concept of metastasis either. So we don't see that cancer spread through the body. We see that an individual has experienced multiple conflicts at once, or is experiencing what we call diagnosis conflicts. So somebody gets a breast cancer diagnosis, and then that in itself is a shock and a trauma and a conflict, which initiates something like a death fright conflict. And then we have growth in the lungs as well. So it's like a spin-off effect as opposed to the cancer moving through the body. So again, it's just a totally different, it's a change in perspective, and it's a complete mind rewiring. We've got to see that a cancer is just a growth of cells. It's not this like evil random thing that's out to kill us and attack it. We've got to see that it's our own body producing this thing in order to assist our survival, and that communicating with it and working with it is going to be far more beneficial. And geez, I wish we had more routes to be able to investigate this kind of thing in conjunction with mainstream medicine. Like, I wish that more doctors, scientists, labs were open to exploring this kind of thing, and that we could get some really like solid, good, hardcore data on this kind of thing. Dr. Harmer did have like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of case studies on all of his works, and there is a lot of body of work there. But yeah, I really wish that in the modern mainstream world that we would see more collaboration on this. I think we would make some huge steps forward. Yeah, we would. Yeah, you can see there's a conflict of interest in some cases there. Yeah, it doesn't make much money. If people can look after themselves, it's not very profitable, is it? It doesn't align with the business, does it? No, mate. Very cool. Is there anything else? I think we'll wrap this up now. We're kind of pushing over an hour here. Hopefully we've kept all of our listeners and watchers engaged. It's been a beautiful, like you said, juicy conversation. Is there anything that's on your mind that like is a really last profound bit of the mushroom world that you'd love to share with people, or anything that's on your heart or mind right now? I think that it comes for me when I think about the future of mushrooms and the immediate benefit that we can obtain from it is grow food for your neighbors, grow food
become self-sufficient and learn how mushrooms can assist your composting, your nutrient intake, your relationships with your community, because they are very achievable food to grow for anyone with any experience. So that's my main message for the short-term future of mushrooms. And I'm sure we're going to find out more. We'll have to have another chat again in the future, Nellie, when we understand furthermore about the biological process and the way mushrooms are speaking to us consciously or not. And it's just a very exciting field to be researching.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely down for it. There's just like so many tangents already that I could have. Maybe we would just start a podcast about GNM and mushrooms specifically. Loads of tangents. But yeah, it's been awesome chatting with you again today. Thanks so much for your time and bringing your energy and all your expertise to the screen and to the world. And and to my life personally as well. Really stoked to connect with you.
Yeah, me too, Nellie. It's so good that you're in the local area and we can collaborate on these beautiful things. So thanks for having me for a chat, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, amazing.